Welcome everyone to another Aquarian webinar. And today we're going to be discussing Lyme disease and our integrative approach to that. And for those of you that don't know me, my name is Dr. McLaughlin. I'm the integrative medicine physician at Aquarian, and together with my wonderful wife, we run Aquarian Integrative Health. And really today is about Megan, because I wanted to share Megan's Lyme story with everyone and give you some context on how I view this condition as a physician, but then also as the spouse of someone who's gone through the depths of what all of this entails. Megan was told she had cancer at the age of 13. She faced numerous diagnoses, all of them being wrong, just trying to put labels on her as doctors tried to figure out why her body kept deteriorating. And she spent years on harsh medications, from chemotherapy drugs to painkillers to antibiotics to immunosuppressive drugs, injections, creams, pills, you name it. She saw specialist after specialist. She went from her GP to an endocrinologist to a rheumatologist to an infectious disease doc to a pediatrician, and got stuck on the hamster wheel, going from one specialist to another. And not one of those specialists actually took the time to look at her as a person. And all along, she suffered from unbearable joint pain. She developed several autoimmune disorders, and doctors couldn't figure out why. So they labeled her with this autoimmune condition or this autoimmune condition as her symptoms kept worsening. And she faced debilitating fatigue. And everyone tried to treat these symptoms. They tried to treat the joint pain with drugs. They tried to treat the fatigue with drugs. Tried to fix her antibody titers on blood tests with drugs. And at the end of the day, she just gave up finding a solution. She realized, luckily, that none of the medications were helping. And she did her best to mitigate and navigate the allopathic system. And this was all leading up to when she met me years later. By the time she met me, she'd been dealing with this for 15 years. And our experience together and really trying to figure out what was wrong with her led us to the formation of Aquarian Integrative Health. At one point, early on in our relationship, she'd expressed a little bit of what she'd gone through, but didn't really tell me the totality of what it entailed until much later. But early on in our relationship, she started to have some interesting joint pain and some new rashes come up. And otherwise, she was relatively healthy at this point in time. And I just expressed to her, like, hey, I think there's other things going on that some of the doctors didn't understand, and I think you should do this type of testing and kind of look a little bit deeper and leverage some of the stuff that I utilize. Luckily, she agreed, and we really figured out that Lyme disease was at the root of her condition. And I'm excited to tell you all, at this point, she's had complete resolution of her autoimmune conditions. Symptomatically, she has no symptoms anymore. And on blood tests, it doesn't show any quote-unquote autoimmune issues. She's got no more skin flares, nerve or joint pain, no more brain fog, depression, or anxiety. And she's not on any medications. And she's not constantly going to doctor's visits and getting all these sort of new diagnoses. But more importantly than that, the pain and the agony of doing the small things is gone. The shame and embarrassment of having something wrong with her has evaporated. This is a huge thing that goes along with any chronic conditions, is this belief that you're not going to get better. And a big reason why we started Aquarian together is because I don't want anyone to go through what she endured. And Megan definitely doesn't want anyone to have to endure the things that she did. A big reason why this happened to Megan, and unfortunately this is not uncommon, is that there's massive voids in modern healthcare that need to be addressed. Main one is the over-specialization of medicine. So in Megan's journey, every specialist was just looking at her through a very specific lens, and they missed looking at her as a whole person. There's a massive lack of understanding of basic physiology. So what actually causes autoimmune issues, and the links between the skin and the gut and all of these other hidden infections and toxicities that drive autoimmune processes in the body is just not common knowledge for a lot of physicians. There's a massive overemphasis on biochemistry in medicine currently. And so the thinking was if they just changed her blood markers, she would magically be better. And that's not usually the case. And that wasn't the case for Megan. There's a lack of understanding of circadian biology in medicine. No one ever told her that things in nature can be a massive part of her healing. In fact, on multiple occasions, she was massively deterred from going out in the sun, from going out in nature, because she had an autoimmune condition. And in modern healthcare, there's really an inability to find the primary cause. She saw all these specialists and all these world famous people, and no one put two and two together and realized that Lyme disease was a big part of her clinical picture. In modern medicine, there's, even if they come up with some kind of diagnosis that is in fact close to what someone's dealing with, they just put everyone on a one-size-fits-all killing spree. And we'll see that exemplified, especially with Lyme disease. And on the same notion, there's a one pill, one cure mentality. So we just kill everything. We just have this magic pill that gets given to people and everyone gets treated the same. And when they don't respond, they say, oh, well, it's in your head, or all of these crazy things that Megan's been told over the years that a lot of people get told. But when we talk about Lyme disease, this is not something that's just a fly-by-night thing. This is not something that very few people suffer from. This is a major issue in the United States and worldwide, but especially in the US. So these are numbers from the CDC up till 2018. And then because of COVID, they stopped tracking. And there's a foundation in California called the Bay Area Lyme Foundation, and they've done some number estimates. So we're looking at almost 1 million people a year contracting Lyme disease. And the diagnosis of that is far less, and there's many, many reasons for that. One of them is a lot of the diagnosis relies on appropriate case reporting. So if people get a tick, they go to a physician, and that gets reported to the CDC, well, that's one thing, but usually that doesn't happen. And more importantly, most of the infections get undiagnosed because a lot of people will have interactions and things happen that lead to Lyme disease, but they don't put two and two together. And then what happens, just like in Megan's case, they get stuck on this hamster wheel of seeing specialists for different things going on in their body, and no one's connecting it back to that original insult. This is a study from Brown University, and they estimated at the end of 2020, 1.9 million people in the US have persistent Lyme disease. And so these people are people just like my wife who have years of persistent disability, and no one's giving them any answers for that. So for those of you that don't know, Lyme disease is a vector-borne illness. And what that means is it's primarily transferred from biting insects, so ticks, mosquitoes, deer flies, and spiders, to humans. And the unfortunate reality with Lyme in America is Lyme disease invades, suppresses, exposes, compromises, and exhausts all cellular functions in the body to the point that all disease processes can and will exist. When we're talking about Lyme disease, Borrelia is the main culprit. Borrelia is a bacterial spirochete that moves through the blood and connective tissue of the body and can affect the nervous system, the brain, and the heart. And the thing that I want you to remember is Borrelia never occurs alone. Whether it's a tick or a mosquito or a spider, there are other things that come along with Borrelia Originally, Borrelia was found to have approximately 32 genes. We now know that some species of Borrelia have been found to have up to 800 different genes. And this is a problem, obviously, because these spirochetes are evolving and they're adapting to our environment, and some of that can be just a response to the ever-increasing environment toxicity that we face, and some of that can be man-made or pushed along by different types of experiments. And Lyme spirochetes can survive exposure to stomach acid in over 600 degrees Fahrenheit due to biofilm. These things are very resistant to treatment and very prone to surviving even in incredibly harsh conditions, which makes treatment really, really difficult. So there's two versions of Lyme disease. There's sort of the more naturally occurring Lyme disease that is endemic in Europe, in the Black Forest, primarily in Germany, and they've even excavated old frozen human specimens from different parts of Europe that have been frozen for hundreds of years and discovered Lyme disease within them. So this bacterial spirochete has been something that's been around for a very, very long time. And sort of the natural version or the European version tends to cause joint pain and swelling and mild discomfort, but people can live a long time in health with it. In the US, we have a different version, more of a biological weapon version, that has spread from the east of the US to the west in the US, and it causes severe fatigue, joint pain and swelling, cranial nerve issues, digestive issues, skin issues, and all sorts of things. Within Borrelia, there's three forms. There's the Borrelia bacterial spirochete, which is a spiral-shaped bacteria that moves through the connective tissue of our body. And it moves through the connective tissue in our body at extremely fast rates, 2,000 times faster than our white blood cells. And it turns on enzymes within us to soften our connective tissues to allow it to move through. Then there's the round body or the cyst form of the spirochete. And this is the dormant form of Borrelia that's very resistant to stressors, but it contains the full DNA of the Borrelia. It doesn't consume nutrients or oxygen or anything, so it's a very inert form. But the problem is the immune system recognizes this form as foreign and problematic and attacks the tissues where these round bodies or cysts are. And this is the primary driver of autoimmune conditions precipitated by Lyme disease. Then there's also the biofilm form, and the biofilms are polysaccharide layers of microbes that line the gut wall, the mucous membranes, and the nerve sheaths within our body, and they're very, very resistant to antibiotic treatment. And so biofilms can be primarily Lyme. They also have other bacteria, parasites, funguses within them. These are ecosystems within our body, and some of them can be very commensal or helpful to our body, and some of them can be very pathogenic. When a tick bites us, the saliva of the tick transmits the Borrelia alongside with other pathogens. Okay. And especially in ticks, this can be very problematic because ticks will often carry more pathogens than, say, a spider or a mosquito. And also ticks have hormones in them that counteract the antibodies sent by us to the area. And they send an anti-inflammatory to prevent itching of the area so the tick can really latch on and stay there without us noticing. And the thing with Borrelia, it has a very strong outside wall, which makes it very hard to kill, even with a sufficient immune response. Oftentimes, people encounter a tick and they'll get a bite that looks like this, and this is what they call a bullseye rash. And this can be very indicative of Lyme disease. But the problem is there's a big myth, and the myth is everyone gets a rash. So if you get bit by a tick, you'll get a rash. The reality is only 20% of people get a rash. And a rash is really a second infection phenomenon from a slightly different strain of Borrelia. And the big thing too with Lyme disease is mosquitoes, flies, spiders, all these other biting insects outside of ticks do not cause rashes. So people can get very, very sick and have no recollection or no record of ever getting a rash before. And if you do get a rash, it's really indicative of the fact that you've been bit or infected from something, whether it's a tick or another biting insect, previously. Once you get the bite or transmission, it looks a lot like a cold. So you might get a rash, you might not. You get a fever, headache, extreme tiredness, joint stiffness, muscle aches and pains, swollen lymph nodes. And most people will say, oh, it's just a bad cold. And it might knock you out for a day, it might knock you out for a week, and then you kind of get on with your life. But then what starts to happen is you start getting joint pain and swelling, lightheadedness, your stomach gets a little bit upset, start getting an irregular heartbeat, vision starts to change a little bit, get some depression type symptoms, trouble recollecting words. And that kind of morphs into this fatigue that sets into the body. You start getting sleep disturbances, headaches, muscle pain, neck pain. And eventually what happens, Lyme disease slowly degrades the hippocampus and other parts of the brain because the spirochetes move from where the bite was into the myelin that lines all of our nerves and embeds into the axons in our nervous system. And the hippocampus is associated with memory. And that's why the primary complaint of Lyme patients is a loss of memory. And the myelin sheaths, if they get destroyed over a long enough period of time, we start getting autoimmune reactions in the myelin sheaths, which cause all types of neurological problems. And eventually, with persistent or undiagnosed Lyme disease, we get things like arthritis, chronic fatigue syndrome, Alzheimer's, MS, ALS, lupus, and Sjogren's, which is what Megan was diagnosed with. And so much of that is they start to develop an autoimmune condition within the connective tissue because of where all these cyst and round body forms of Lyme disease are. You can get thyroid disease, irritable bowel syndrome, psychiatric disorders, and autism. And a lot of this is thought to be due in part to molecular mimicry and the fact that in the active form of Lyme disease, the Borrelia is excreting wastes and toxins that are causing cell necrosis and a chronic inflammatory response. And Lyme disease really exemplifies the fact that at the root of any autoimmune condition, there's either an infection or a toxicity in the tissue not identified and an environmental mismatch. So when we have circadian mismatches and problems regulating our hormones in our system because we've removed ourselves from nature, and then we have these chronic infections or toxicities deep within tissues, that sets the perfect storm for autoimmune conditions. And specifically when we're talking about joints, Borrelia affects the synovial tissue within joints, or synovial fluid within joints. And so we get knee pain, spine pain, shoulder pain, wrists, fingers, even TMJ joints can be affected. And as these spirochetes move through the body, they have very specific mechanisms of destroying connective tissue. And this connective tissue destruction can lead to labral tears in the hip, spontaneous ruptures of tendons and ligaments after slight strains. It can also lead to spinal disc pathology. I wanted to bring this up because this is massively important in that, in my experience in clinic, working with people, most chronic musculoskeletal pain is a chronic infection that's gone undiagnosed. Any type of musculoskeletal injury or surgery on different types of tissue in the body, those sites become immunocompromised. And infections are attracted to those sites, especially Borrelia, especially if it's a joint with synovial fluid in it or a lot of dense collagen. And the big thing for Lyme disease with me too is it affects fertility. And right now, worldwide, there is a fertility crisis. It's harder and harder for women to get pregnant successfully. And undiagnosed Lyme disease is a part of this. And also there can be in utero transfer between mother and baby because spirochetes can cross the placenta. And the fetus can develop altered immune responses to spirochetes, even if the spirochetes don't cross the placenta. If mom is constantly dealing with some kind of autoimmune condition precipitated by Lyme disease or other things precipitated by Lyme disease, well, then the fetus will develop these altered immune responses to the spirochetes so that if they get a bite later on in life after they're born, that can cause a whole host of very negative health problems. Spirochetes can also pass via breast. And Lyme has been shown to contribute to stillbirths, miscarriage, and perinatal deaths, usually between 28 weeks and 7 days of life. So much of treatment of Lyme disease is not only alleviating the problem for the person, but especially in women, ensuring that they can have healthy, successful pregnancies with healthy babies. Because in children, Lyme can contribute to cardiac abnormalities, delayed motor skills and speech, cognitive learning disabilities, autism, gut issues, and food sensitivities. And so in order to avoid all of these things for future generations, we really have to take this seriously now. Another reason we have to take this seriously is Borrelia can affect the central nervous system. And that can be something minor like headaches and neck stiffness, memory problems, depression, but it can easily escalate into panic attacks, suicidal thoughts, seizures, POTS, Alzheimer's, MS. These can all be big problems with Borrelia at the root of the issue. And even I would go so far as saying Alzheimer's can be seen as a neurospirochete. And this has been found in both Borrelia and syphilis because they're both a type of spirochete. They're shown in brain tissue, in blood vessels, and in Alzheimer's plaque. And I would even say the Alzheimer's plaques, or these amyloid plaques that everyone was trying to treat with certain drugs, are the last attempt of the immune system to encase the Lyme microbes to protect the brain. And it only takes a few hours before the spirochetes show up in the central nervous system. And this is in large part due to how spirochetes move through our body and how quickly they can. And now it might take up to 2 years or longer to develop symptoms, but so many times when I see people with severe neurological conditions and neurodegenerative conditions, when we trace it back and we leverage the type of testing that we use in our office, we can see that Lyme disease is playing a major role in their condition. And the reality is a diagnosis of Lyme disease can increase the risk of any mental disorder by 24%. And when people have had frequent incidences of Lyme disease, this risk increases to 79%. And so this is why we have to get this right in someone's life early, so they don't consistently have these issues over time that start to stack and build and lead to all these degenerative conditions in the body and really ruin their body and ruin their mind. And so how do we find out if we have Lyme disease? The problem becomes the testing for Lyme is not particularly good. And so a lot of the times we'll do the standard test that the CDC recommends. And if the test is negative, they'll say, oh, you don't have Lyme disease, when you may have all of these symptoms of Lyme disease that we just discussed. And so the current gold standard diagnostic for Lyme disease is a 2-tiered blood test. And so you do an ELISA test. And then if that's negative, they say, oh, you don't have Lyme disease, it's fine. And then you do a Western blot test. And then if both of those are positive, they'll say, okay, well, you have Lyme disease. But the problem with that is the ELISA measures infection-fighting antibodies against Borrelia, and it'll miss up to 60% of acute cases. And it takes 8 weeks post-infection for the antibodies to be high enough. And so in acute cases, this is just not pertinent testing. And the other thing too, like I said, when we get bit, especially by a tick, not only are we getting Borrelia, but we're getting potentially all these other types of pathogens along with it. And this testing does not test for any of that. The stealth nature of Borrelia makes it very difficult to diagnose. It stays deep within tissues. It has the ability to live inside cells, has elaborate ways of evading the immune system like all advanced microbes do, and it can change its genetic signature very readily. And the big thing is it doesn't require high concentration of the microbe to cause illness, whereas some other bacterial illnesses, we need a lot of that within us to cause illness, whereas Borrelia, we don't. And there are some private labs, iGeneX, Armin Labs, Fry Labs, Vibrant, and Galaxy. And some of them can be useful, but the problem is there's no real reliable biomarkers. And a lot of times when someone's had Lyme for long enough, they have severe immune deficiencies. And these immune deficiencies make it very difficult to show the immune response in a test. All of these tests, and some of them are great, only check for a very limited amount of species. And there's a whole bunch of different types of Borrelia that can cause health problems. Borrelia burgdorferi is the main one, but there's lots of other ones. And there's other pathogens that can ride along with Borrelia that you'd have to get other testing for. And these tests are usually hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. So if we're doing repeated testing, this gets very expensive. The reality is most testing is only looking at the blood or looking at the body's immune response. But what we need to be able to do is we have to look within the end organs themselves and the tissues themselves. Because in chronic infections, the spirochetes corkscrew through the connective tissue deep into the end organ. And in acute infections, the spirochetes, like I said before, can move faster than the white blood cells. And so they're evading the immune system. So we need better testing. And one of the things we can do is go back to basics and take our temperature. And in an acute infection, obviously it's going to raise our temperature, but it's not very specific, but at least we know there's some kind of infection happening in the body, or my body is mounting some immune response to something external. And in chronic infections, our body temperature actually lowers over time. So when someone comes in and they have the signs and symptoms of Lyme disease or other types of infections, and they have chronically low body temperature, this is a very, very important thing to recognize, because for each 0.2 degree drop below 98.6, it results in a doubling of the pathogens in the body. We can also look at basic blood work, so just the standard blood work that most physicians would order. And oftentimes chronic Lyme can look like low white blood cells, sort of below 5,000, low alkaline phosphatase, low MSH, elevated insulin, because the biotoxins create insulin resistance to use our sugars for their processes, high thyroid antibodies, and high complement 3A and complement 4A, and high TGF-beta 1. The C3A, C4A, TGF-beta 1, and the MMP9 are not specific to Lyme disease, but we can start to develop a clinical picture when we put all of these things together. And these labs cost a few dollars rather than thousands of dollars. And one of the things we utilize tremendously in our own practice is autonomic response testing. And this is a beautiful, non-invasive tool to discern if Lyme is a causative factor in someone's illness and where in the body the issues actually are. And so with this, we're very easily able to assess for multiple stressors in the body and what the predominant ones are, whether it's Lyme, mold, parasites, toxins, chemicals, heavy metals, etc. And we can easily discern very quickly what remedies are needed to actually address these stressors in the body. And even if someone has an acute Lyme infection, or especially if someone has a chronic Lyme infection, the most important thing to address at the beginning of any kind of treatment protocol may not be the Lyme itself. And so this is where we gain another understanding of the fact that just because I have X doesn't mean I immediately need to go in and kill X, right? All our bodies are unique. We have a whole bunch of things going on in our body. And a lot of the times, especially if someone's been suffering from Lyme for a long period of time, we need to prepare the body and heal the body in a way to allow for the appropriate remediation of all these bacterial spirochetes. If we just go in and try and hammer it with anti-Lyme medications or anti-Lyme herbals, that's often not successful. And so we have to prepare the body in the right way. And autonomic response testing allows us to figure out exactly how that looks from a remedy perspective. In our office, we also use bioresonance testing. Our bioresonance testing is a non-invasive technology that allows us to measure the body's electromagnetic signatures to assess organ and tissue function all the way down to the DNA level. So if someone has a change in their genetics or their epigenetics that's affecting their ability to detox, that's affecting their immune system, that's affecting their ability to withstand any kind of Lyme insult, we can see that with our bioresonance. And this allows us to assess the whole body within minutes. So the nervous system, the digestive system, the musculoskeletal system, we can assess everything very, very quickly. And we can pinpoint the precipitating stressors and get a complete picture of someone's terrain. So not only can we pinpoint if Lyme is a causative issue, where it is in the body, and what we're going to do about it. Once we've figured all that stuff out, a lot of people say, okay, so what do we do now? So we know I have Lyme disease. What do we need to do for treatment? And there's a big myth going on with Lyme is, oh, you just have to give antibiotics and the person will be fine. And some people have gone so far as saying antibiotic cure Lyme disease, which I personally think is ridiculous. And I think it's ridiculous because up to 65% of patients receiving antibiotics remain ill 3 years after treatment. And those treated with antibiotics have more fatigue, more pain, more neurocognitive difficulties than the ones that don't. And antibodies are known to decrease spirochetes, and that's great. But that's because when spirochetes are threatened, they convert back into their round body form, or they go into biofilm-like colonies that are more difficult to treat. And these round body cysts will more than quadruple under antibiotic therapy. So symptomatically, if you take antibiotics, especially at higher doses, you might feel better. But what you're doing is you're feeling better now to have more long-term issues later, like autoimmune conditions, neurodegenerative conditions, because you're pushing the disease process deeper into the body. And doxycycline is a very common antibiotic that's used to treat Lyme. It reduces spirochetal structures by 90%, but increases the number of round bodies by twofold. And amoxicillin can reduce spirochetes by 85%, but increases the number of round bodies by 68%. And metronidazole, again, can remove spirochetes by up to 90%, but increases the number of round bodies by 80%. The problem is the antibiotics work because they decrease the spirochetes, but they don't get rid of the disease, because all it's doing is changing from one form to another, and sometimes increasing the condition more than before. The problem is the cyst form can eventually become a spirochete later in life. And the cyst form is not toxic and has no biological consequence, and that's a great thing. But they emit a certain frequency, a low amplitude frequency that the immune system can sense. And the immune system cannot distinctly target it because it's not releasing any biochemical signal. These are electrofrequency signals. And the immune system is picking this up, and this completely dysregulates the immune system where the cysts are located. This is one of the main precipitators of autoimmune disease. So our immune system knows there's something wrong when there's Lyme cysts in the body, but it can't locate them properly, so then it starts to attack our own tissue and cause a whole host of problems. And the biggest thing too is Borrelia itself is not known to possess any resistance mechanisms and is susceptible to standard antibiotics like doxycycline in vitro, which means in a petri dish, but it's been shown to become tolerant to antibiotics once it's inside a living system. And so obviously that's problematic. When they do 28 days of oral antibiotics, it doesn't change anything within the system. And when they do 28 days of IV antibiotics plus 56 days of oral antibiotics, that only leads to a 27% cure rate. And again, cure rate, they're looking at spirochetes in the body. They're not looking for round bodies. So we're just pushing this condition deeper and deeper into tissue. And biofilms, another kind of form of Lyme and Borrelia, can survive against harsh environmental conditions, including antibiotics. And that's the reason why they get created in the presence of antibiotics. So not only can the spirochete move into a cyst, the spirochete can move into biofilm. And these biofilms line the gut wall, the nerve sheaths, and the inner lining of the blood vessel, and precipitate chronic conditions over time. And so the proper treatment should be focused on ridding the spirochetes from the tissues and preventing cyst and biofilm formation, rather than just trying to kill spirochetes, the net effect of that being driving the condition deeper and deeper into tissue. This is why so many people end up with post-treatment Lyme disease, because this treatment or this standard of care is totally inappropriate, in my opinion. And in fact, I think post-treatment Lyme disease is just failed antibiotic treatment, because we've not done anything to actually remediate the condition. And we're just pushing this deeper into someone's body, setting the stage for autoimmune conditions and neurological conditions later in life. Another big thing with Lyme disease I want to talk about is I always tell people you're allowed to have more than one thing wrong with you. And kind of understand now that Lyme disease is primarily Borrelia, primarily one type of Borrelia, but there's many, many species of Borrelia. And like I've said, when we get a bite from a biting insect or different types of vectors, there's other pathogens that can come along with it. So there's a big myth that, oh, Lyme disease is just Borrelia and we just have to treat it with antibiotics and you'll be fine. The reality is there's Borrelia, there's Babesia, there's Bartonella, Mycoplasma, Chlamydia, Ehrlichia, Rickettsia, that can all happen from different types of biting insects at the same time. We can also get mycotoxins, parasite infections, candida, and staphylococcus infections at the same time, because these different types of vectors can carry all of these things together. And the big thing too is you can have these co-infections without having Borrelia. So you have all the symptoms of Lyme disease, and then you go get standard testing, and they say, no, you don't have a Borrelia infection. And this leads to a lot of improper diagnosis because people have symptoms of Lyme, but do not test positive for the Borrelia specifically. And this is important because a lot of these different microbes need to be treated differently than just Borrelia. And more often than not, failures in treatment are often due to unrecognized co-infection. And the other thing too with Borrelia is Borrelia exchanges DNA by contact with different microbes. And oftentimes Borrelia is also found to have Babesia and Mycoplasma within the DNA of the bacteria. And this is because there's no fixed boundaries between many microbes. So they're trying to constantly adapt to changes in the environment around us, changes to the environment within us. And we can get this constellation of different types of pathogens together. These infections are primarily coming from insect vectors. They're also been shown to be in water contamination, from the farming industry and our foods, from vaccines, from our pets and animals, especially Bartonella from cats, from different types of insects that don't necessarily bite but can be in our environment, and from biological warfare, which was discussed with respect to Borrelia. And many Lyme infections coexist with mold toxicity. Mold is heavy on many foods we eat, and the antibiotics we take, in addition to living or residing in water-damaged buildings. And mold exposure can be a catalyst for the onset of Lyme symptoms. And so typically, a common story that I see with folks is they've had Lyme disease, whether they fully recognize it or not throughout their history. They took a whole bunch of antibiotics that are all mold-based. So they've dramatically increased the levels of mold in their body. And then they might change a house, or they might move to a different state, and they might be exposed to more environmental mold. And then the environmental mold gets blamed for all of their symptoms, when the reality is they've been poisoning themselves with antibiotics, and underneath everything, there is a Lyme disease process going on. And it's important to note too that parasites are the largest of the microbial organisms, and they eat bacteria, they eat Lyme disease and mold. And so a lot of the times we have to treat parasites if that's part of someone's clinical problem, in addition to dealing with all of these other things. In our practice, patients who are not infected with Lyme is only about 20%. And patients who are carriers of Lyme and or their co-infections, and their symptoms are solely caused by Lyme, is about 20%. And so the majority of our practice is people are carriers of Lyme disease. They do have Lyme disease, but their symptoms are being precipitated by other infections like the mold or parasites or other toxicities. So when we work through a hierarchy of treatment, we have to deal with all of these things in a very, very specific manner to actually allow someone to be healthy. And this can be very confusing to folks because there's a lot of overlap between these different things. And so in the purple here, you can see the relationship between Lyme and mold. And in the orange, you can see the common symptoms between Lyme, mold, and parasites. And all of these things can start to look very similar. And so that's why we have to leverage really, really good testing to delineate what are the main drivers of someone's health problem, and what is the totality of things going on, and how do we systematically move through these things in the right way so that we can deal with all of these things in a safe, reasonable manner, rather than just going in and saying, oh, it's just a mold problem, I have to do a whole bunch of antifungals, or it's just a Lyme problem and I have to do a whole bunch of antibiotics. We have to look at the context of the patient and it's in their entirety. But this is only part of the picture. And so perhaps at this point, we've figured out there's something wrong, but we also have to consider that it's not about just killing the infection. And it's not about killing the infection because we have to deal with the terrain of the body. And unfortunately, most of our bodies look like a garbage dump. And so if we just leave the garbage to pile up because the garbage men can't get there, or we've just produced too much garbage and we just keep putting it outside, and then we get rats and skunks and raccoons and flies and maggots and all of these fun things. If we just go in and try and kill all of those things, but we don't do anything about the garbage that's sitting outside of our house, we're going to have a real problem. And those things will just keep coming back and keep coming back and keep coming back. And I think in 2024, what it looks like is financial stress, family stress, poor diet, EMF stress, work stress, artificial light stress. All of these things are constantly stressing us, affecting our terrain. So until we clean up this, essentially our lifestyle, our habits, our food, it's going to be very, very hard to overcome these things. The reality is we live in an immunocompromised environment now. And this allows for latent, dormant, formerly manageable infections to come flaring to the forefront. This is lifestyle stress. This is man-made EMF. This is excessive blue light. This is toxic water, toxic food, and poor air quality. This is such a pressing issue for everybody, whether you have a known health condition or not. Stresses are causing an immunocompromised state in all of us that are precipitating these things. So for many folks, it's just a matter of time. And this has been such an important thing for me. As a side note, this is why I created the Realign regimen. And this is my masterclass on how to go through cleaning up your home, your water, your air, your environment to allow your body to heal. And this is because I firmly believe we cannot get well in the same environment we got sick in. And so alongside any direct treatment for causative agents of Lyme disease, we have to adjust our circadian biology to be congruent with healing. That means darkness at night, no screens at night. That means getting sunshine and getting outside. And we have to think about our EMF environment and all of these other things. And so this becomes a very important piece of the puzzle that unfortunately is never discussed in the Lyme conversation or in any other conversations when it comes to infectious disease. The other thing that doesn't get discussed is the idea of drainage support. And so we have to support the lymphatic system, the cardiovascular system, the gut, and the urinary system to actually allow the body to get rid of things. And unfortunately, because we're so inundated with all these environmental stressors, our normal pathways that allow for proper drainage and detoxification are incredibly overburdened and don't work as well as they should. And so we have to remove what's burdening the immune system environmentally, energetically, emotionally, and mentally. And part of our diagnostic process is figuring out what those unique variables are for that person. Because until we do that, getting well becomes very difficult. And when we're talking about specifically the lymphatic system, this is incredibly overburdened. One, from these infections that we have, especially Lyme disease. Two, our environment, our lack of exercise, our habits. And what ends up happening is we get these swollen lymph nodes, these swollen ankles, neck pain, distended bellies, brain fog, varicose veins, all these things. And these areas of the body with this lymphatic congestion become areas where Lyme likes to reside. And so one of the first steps we have to take is really improving the lymphatic system and open up these drainage pathways to allow the body to detoxify, so that when we address these causative agents, the Borrelia and all the other co-infections, the body can actually overcome them. If we don't do these steps, then what happens is the body gets overburdened with all of these essentially dead spirochetes and co-infections, all these things in the body, but there's no way to get them out. That can precipitate a whole host of symptoms in somebody. When we're talking about the terrain, we also have to consider nutrient depletion. We have to consider this because Lyme characteristically depletes specific nutrients within the system. Magnesium, zinc, B6, iodine, and copper are the main ones. And we also get destruction of the collagen within the body because of how the spirochetes move through our system. And this can lead to not only the joint pain, but skin issues, connective tissue issues, and all these things. So from a dietary standpoint, we have to seek out good collagen protein as a replacement. In our toxic environment, we're so inundated with all these different chemicals and metals. And the most important one in the Lyme conversation is aluminum, because aluminum has been shown to be a growth factor for Lyme, especially within joints. And so anytime somebody has a diagnosis of Lyme disease or someone's seeking out Lyme treatment, they also have to be tested for aluminum toxicity. And that has to be treated alongside the Lyme disease. Because again, if we try killing the Lyme disease and getting rid of the microbes, but I have an overabundance of aluminum in the body, which essentially acts as food for the spirochetes, I'm going to consistently have problems, especially in the nervous system, because we know that aluminum likes to collect in nervous system tissue. So if I have something that's essentially a food for spirochetes in my nervous system, and I'm constantly just trying to kill spirochetes without removing that food, being the aluminum, then I'm going to have a whole host of problems. The other thing when it comes to our terrain is the man-made EMF. And this is very important in the Lyme conversation because cell phone radiation has been shown to facilitate the growth of Lyme spirochetes and cone. If I don't change my relationship with my phone, if I don't change my EMF environment, I'm creating a situation where I'm constantly driving these spirochetes within my body, precipitating symptoms. The name of the game, at very least, is to reduce some of our EMF exposure. So cell phones on airplane mode while on the body or at bedtime. We have to turn off our Wi-Fi routers at bedtime, get rid of our shield, our smart meters, assess the wiring in our home, and rule out any dirty electricity. And so these are the bare bones basic steps that we have to do, again, to create an environment of healing and allow for the terrain of our body to start to heal so that I can effectively deal with the causative agents. The other thing when it comes to our terrain is our mental terrain. And so the bad marriage, the unhappy childhood, the food allergies, the stressful job, the headaches, the leaky gut, the joint pain, all go together. And so really the question is, are the emotional, spiritual issues that cause the Lyme, or are they a byproduct of the disruption of the brain chemistry and accumulation of the Lyme? And the answer to that question is everyone's unique. And so more often than not, the spirochetes are always there for a reason. At least they stick around in the body for a reason. And they're not always the primary cause of the problem. And in many patients I've seen with chronic Lyme disease, there's a feeling of disempowerment based on a series of limiting beliefs that someone has accumulated over their life. And this could be from family, from spouses, from their career. Unfortunately, in the case of Lyme, it's often from physician, as many patients suffer even more at the hands of well-meaning physicians. When the physician takes the person's autonomy away, their power away, by saying they have nothing wrong with them, or by saying they have to do X, and if it doesn't work, it just means it's in your head. A lot of times physicians are at the root of this disempowerment that people experience. So no matter how good the Lyme protocol is, ultimately that feeling of disempowerment has to be recognized and overcome in an appropriate manner. And so how we approach Lyme and Lyme treatment is we treat the human and not the disease. Because more often than not, when people come to us, they have a constellation of things going on. And Lyme, about 80% of the time, is part of it, but 60% of the time is not the main driver of their current issue. We have to ascertain what is actually stressing the system. The reality is we cannot heal under intense sympathetic stress. So what we have to do is unburden the internal terrain, whether that's chemicals, heavy metals, other infections. We have to improve drainage. We have to resolve emotional and mental trauma and limiting belief. And then we have to retrain the nervous system. In tandem with all of those things, we have to change our external environment to decrease the stress that we experience from all the things around us. That could be mold in our home. That could be excessive EMF at work or home. That could be emotional stress from work, family, friends, or community. And so when we put all of this together, this creates a very effective treatment program. Becomes more than just trying to kill the Lyme spirochete and hope for the best. Because the reality is now in 2024, our environment is much different than even it was 10 years. We are faced with unprecedented challenges that our body is trying to mitigate. And the Lyme is just often one piece of the puzzle. It's a very, very important piece of the puzzle that needs to be addressed. But if we don't address these other things, at least rule them out, then our Lyme treatment is never going to be successful. And the tools that we use different types of herbal formulations to address Lyme, to improve drainage, to work on the body in general. We use a lot of frequency medicine. We use photobiomodulation, infrared sauna to assist with detox. We use low-dose immunotherapy to help regulate the immune system from the Lyme infections or the other infections going on with somebody. We use bioidentical remedies to help deal with specific strains of Borrelia or other co-infections. Psychobiology to address the mental emotional components of things and the limiting beliefs that people have. Manual therapy to see structurally if there is issues with flow in the body, preventing normal detoxification. Those have to be remedied. And then ultimately brain retraining. And just a note on the brain retraining for us, that's something that is done much later in a program. A lot of people hear about it and want to try it right away. But if you haven't improved drainage, if you haven't improved the terrain of the body, if you haven't improved your environment, brain retraining is going to have a very limited effect. This is why we test everything. We test everything because we need to give the right intervention at the right time in the right dose. And this is because the body needs to be allowed to heal, not forced to heal. For us, the body is a dynamic system that's designed to keep you healthy. And so if there is a problem, there's a reason. Whether you're suffering from brain fog or joint pain or neurological issue, or your story sounds very similar to Megan's, you owe it to yourself to get to the bottom of it, to really figure out what's going on and then implement solutions that will help you in a very comprehensive, personalized manner. And ultimately, this is the difference between us and functional medicine. We're looking at the human in their entirety, mental, emotional, physical, energetic. What's going on with somebody in their environment, in their family, in their community, and what are the causative agents driving ill health? So rather than just trying to treat a blood test or just looking at a functional test and saying, oh, we'll just do this or just do that, we address everything because we cannot separate out different parts of us We have to acknowledge that and treat the human as a whole. So I invite you to join us in revolutionizing your health. And you're more than welcome to book a free consultation with us today, where we can discuss how we can help you. You can text us anytime at 689-219-6979. You can email us at support@aquariansolution.com, or book a call with us directly on our website, aquarianhealthsolutions.com. Thank you.